Here's a just small example of like the beginning of Main Street where you see these lines stretching across to all these different buildings. And so one of the things that the town needs to consider as part of the underground utilities discussion, and this would include power, cable, internet, any other utilities that have wires along the CMP poles. There would be some of the benefits associated. That would be obviously the visual benefits, as I've shown kind of in the photo. It would be less disruptive in the village during storms. So when there's storms, the likelihood of power loss in the village itself, depending on the source of where the power is coming from, could provide less disruption to the village during weather-related events. We could also have better street lighting rather than just having those gooseneck light poles that hang off of the existing telephone poles. We could have nice ornamental lighting that you see in downtown villages all over the area. And then we could do it as a phased approach, so we could explore to maybe do like the core of the Main Street corridor. I know in the memo and the map that was provided in the packet, it kind of shows an area of where we might want to do it, but we could kind of phase it based on some of the construction that's taking place as part of the Village Transformation Project and the roadways. We could also pursue grant funding opportunities for underground utilities. Primarily, underground utilities provide vault systems that are underground, basically large tunnels type things where all these wires would be mounted and put through in order to get them off. And then you would need to we'd have to work with the utilities. We could work with them both for relocation as well as potentially sharing in some of the costs as they need to make investments in their infrastructure. We could time that with those utilities, and then we would, as part of the potentially phased approach, if we explored putting in the duct work in the ground, we could potentially do it without actually moving the utilities, so it would be there and be ready to go during road construction processes that would be happening as part of the partnership with Maine DOT. And then we'd want to work to offer support both for this subject and the sewer subject that we'll talk about next, support to property owners to get those utilities underground, and we would have to work with them to have the conduit run and things of that nature to connect existing buildings. So it's a fairly complex project, but the timing would be right to at least kind of get the infrastructure in the ground and get the stubbing in place as we work with Maine DOT to do this major road reconstruction project as part of the transformation project. So what we wanted to visit today with the council was to ask if the council desires us to continue to explore this opportunity. One, to maybe work with staff and our current engineering consultant to get some cost estimates for what that might be. We've been warned that sometimes that may scare us away, is the cost estimates, but I think, again, there's no better time to do it when we're doing this major revamp of the village roadway infrastructure. So here today to talk about this, and we'll try to keep the subject separate just for conversation purposes. Doug Webster is here, our Community Development Director, and then Will Haskell, our consulting engineer, is here as well to be able to help us converse this subject.
Yeah, great, thanks. That's a great kind of overview of what we need to consider. I think when we talked about this in the Village Transformation group meeting the last time, I think we all recognize that there is a significant cost with this, but to Mike's point, the timing would be good, because after the road is dug up for this project with the DOT, they're not going to dig it up again for many years after that. I think one concern that was raised, though, was that if we had wanted to pursue underground utilities, potentially we should have been working towards that a couple years ago. So I guess one question I have is, if we do agree to move forward with it, given that we have a construction estimate of about 2028 if we remain on this raised grant timeline, does that really give us enough time to pursue this effectively? Because I don't want to go down this road and spend all the consulting costs associated with exploring it and then really get to a point where we realize we can't execute on it.
Sure, I'll answer that if I may. Oh,
Yeah, David
sorry.
had one comment?
Yeah.
Yeah, a couple things. I just want to chime in. Everything you mentioned before is stuff we've already talked about, but I think the slides are really good because I
Yeah.
think that helps as far as our record is concerned and anybody who watches it. So I appreciate you putting that together. And we kind of already decided we wanted to go down this path, at least as far as finding out what the costs would be. And I don't think anything's changed that way. I mean, we've been
Right.
constantly told that we're late to the table
Right,
whenever we try and plan anything. And we're further ahead on this particular plan than anything we've ever done before.
yeah,
So I think we should be willing to push back on the idea that we've started this too late. I think it also makes sense for us to create that roadmap so that we can get everything in its lane underground and make it predictable in the future when things, you know, either are grown out or people need to add on. I do think we need to allow for natural gas. Whether, you know, you're not gonna put that in the ground now, but I think there needs to be a place for it. I know natural gas is a petroleum product and not as popular among some groups as it was. But propane is a lot more destructive than natural gas is. And propane is our only option in town here, especially for our heavy commercial or any industrial users. Besides the fact that it's less efficient and also gets delivered by truck, which is a whole other issue. So I think it would be extremely short-sighted of us to not at least allow for the possibility of that in the future. One of the things we have heard that is a somewhat limiting factor on, you know, growing commercial or even industrial development in town is the lack of utilities. So it's just something I think that we consider, but I'm all for going ahead and doing the work. In fact, I think from a cost standpoint, we have to be careful because some of the cost of this is gonna be borne by the grant that we get from the federal government. It's not like the town of Gray is gonna have to come up with all the money for the underground utility portion of the project itself. So at least that's my understanding.
well,
So-
I think they would cover things like stormwater and potentially, space for sewer, but I don't think they would cover our conversion of moving like electrical and cable underground, and
I
that
think we would have to find that out.
would, yeah.
Because if it is something that can be paid for in part by that grant, then I think it is even another reason for pursuing it.
I would think if the trench is dug to put in the electric lines, while it's open, you do everything else. So that part, we
Yeah.
shouldn't have to worry about.
Go ahead, Matthew.
I support this idea of underground utilities. I would wanna know, I guess, first, an estimate of what the estimate is gonna cost, because to get a reliable estimate
Right,
is gonna take some engineering dollars, and I'd be curious to know what
yeah,
the cost of the estimate, or an estimate of the estimate, you know what I'm saying, I'm
yes,
sorry.
yeah,
And I guess, you know, since it's been brought up a few times, I wanna go on record in my opposition to, trying to, facilitate or encourage, the building of more fossil fuel infrastructure. I'm against it, and I think the idea of, in the comprehensive plan or of reducing greenhouse gases is contrary, you know, to that priority. I mean, we can argue, you know, back and forth about which fossil fuel is worse. But the fact is, you know, built infrastructure to support fossil fuel use is, you know, that's, to me, that's prioritizing continuing fossil fuel use as opposed to finding ways to transition away from fossil fuel use. So I'm definitely strongly opposed to including natural gas in this. in this estimate.
Okay, noted. Mike, you said that there was possible grant funding, or you're talking aside from the raised grant that?
Yeah, so to answer the question about, basically, we're not too late to this situation because we're currently in negotiations with Maine DOT for the agreement that the council approved at our last meeting, and they're supportive of including these planning aspects as part of the project. Doesn't mean they're gonna pay for them, it doesn't mean that they're gonna be part of the raise grant, but they are okay with us adding these to our planning process. They're basically why we're here is, and you know, I've acknowledged it before, but Councilor Gass does an outstanding job helping to project manage the village transformation project for us. And even though I know you've talked about it before, we just wanted to be 100% sure that this was a road the council wanted to go down. And DOT asked us to be 100% sure as well if we're gonna go down this. So that's why we wanted to visit the subject with the council as soon as possible. But as far as the raise grant opportunity, that really is to do with the road infrastructure. So it wouldn't cover this. So likely, this and any conversations about wastewater would ultimately be the cost of the town. And we could pursue grant opportunities for that, whether it be with a congressionally directed spending grant application or other grant opportunities through you know, the state for, you know, efficiency and things of that nature, or wastewater opportunities as we pursue that to help. So the more grant opportunities we piecemeal together for any of this stuff, it would be part of that. So the underground utilities itself, I've kind of separated wire type utilities and wastewater because they are separate. We haven't specifically considered gas as part of the proposal, but what I will say is that as the village grows, there'll be a demand for hopefully restaurants and cafes and things of that nature, which will need some sort of gas infrastructure for cooking. And so it helps to have an infrastructure that's directly connected to the building versus having tanks all over buildings. And so I understand the opposition of Councilor Height, but I just want to mention that as the village densifies and we have bigger buildings that take up more space, there's going to be less space on properties for things like tanks, dumpsters, all issues that we're going to have to sort out in the future as the village grows and transforms.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Ann.
Just a couple of quick comments. I'm supportive of continuing to explore. Honestly, I mean, outside of the work that Doug did and Will, and to a certain extent Nate did about a year ago, we haven't really done a lot more exploration since. I simply haven't had time to chase this. And one thought I had was, I thought Doug's amoeba that he references in his memo, I wondered whether we might want to, rethink that shape and sort of focus it more on Main Street alone and a narrower, longer section of Main Street, extending it at least past, a little past the Gateway property or perhaps even further, and also extending it maybe up Portland Road a little bit. USDA, the U.S. Department of Agriculture, also has long-term, low-interest loans that can be used for wastewater treatment and for water. I haven't worked with those programs. I really can't say much more than that. But that's another source potentially. And I thought that if my recollection is correct, that TIF funds can be used as to help pay debt associated with bonds and things like that. So,
Yes.
I mean,
For economic development.
for economic
activities.
development. So, I mean, there's a variety of sources, so what we really need to do is figure out, is this feasible in the time frame we need it to be in, and how much is it going to cost us? But I do think when we talk about transforming the village, it's worth trying to give this another, a real college try.
Yeah, I agree. I'm completely on board with at least figuring out if it's feasible and going from there. Mike, do you know what next steps would be for that work?
Yeah, so what we'll do is we'll begin to work with the council's blessing to begin to work with our consulting engineer to help us maybe to, as what Councilor Gass suggested, maybe tighten up the area, and that way we can get a core potential estimate of what we think these underground, ductwork or vaults would be, and then begin some of the discussions with our utility partners to see what their interest is and participation. We do have to have willing utility partners, and I'm fairly confident with at least my existing relationships with Central Maine Power that we'll be able to get their partnership in this and work with the other ones to make that possible. So it might take some time. I know that you might get the power company to do it first, and then it'll take all those other utilities time to move. So we might have stuff underground, but not everything underground. So we'll work to. It's going to take time to do it all. So I think having a general estimate of what this and wastewater is going to cost, we're going to have to come to a crossroads where we decide whether to proceed and develop a funding strategy for those. So we'll try to get. Will, I'm not sure if you're able to craft us an estimate for the estimate, like the council talked about, that we can kind of point out. And we do have funds available already that have been set aside to support the Village Transformation Project that have been authorized by the council and the residents through the warrant process, that we think we can utilize those to help move forward with that planning process. If it's okay with you, should I move forward into wastewater?
Dan had a comment,
Okay.
and then we can do that, yeah.
I just want to second Ann's thoughts about expanding the amoeba. I too think we ought to at least consider going as far as Collie Hill Road, where we know there's going to be hopefully some sort of a feature there that will not only, sort of introduce people to the village proper, but also calm traffic. And then, I hadn't imagined enough to think about going down the Portland Road, but I don't disagree with that thought either. I think the other thing I'm interested in knowing about is like future connectivity, and if we can't do it all and we do some, does that set us up to expand it easier in the future, or is there anything that we can do in the design of the project such that if some future generation of the town wants to expand it, that we don't do anything that sort of gets in the way of that? Those are, I guess, my only other thoughts.
Okay. Any other comments?
Nope. I don't have any.
Doug, you had some?
If I may, thank you. Doug Webster, Planning. So the amoeba, that's a very technical term, that would be like the core, and what I'm hearing the council say is, what would it be for like an ad-alt to extend to the north to Collie Hill, down Portland Road, an appropriate stretch?
You're right.
Shrink it in.
Okay.
Yeah.
But the current, the area that we've already worked on, that's the core. I guess I'm looking for council direction for whether or not the core that we've defined to date, is that an appropriate core to start from?
Dan?
So you're saying that technically we have to go as far as your map shows down Brown Street and up Center Road in order to make the core work?
Those lines were put there because taking into account three-phase and the different utilities. When you go from underground to overhead, you need a riser pole there, and we looked at the volume of utilities, and those locations were the ones that made the most practical sense.
Yep.
That's why they were placed there.
Yeah, I wasn't questioning that. I guess getting certainty that, those poles are,
Okay.
what we're looking at here is really the minimum.
Right.
Okay,
Yeah.
and then
Right.
different directions. Okay,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thanks, Doug. Mike, you wanted to move on to wastewater?
Sure, if
Yep.
everyone's okay with. On wastewater, I wanted to show here a picture. The good thing about this exercise is the town of Wyndham is gone through this exercise of exploring new wastewater, and so we have the opportunity to watch them. But I stole some materials from their materials where they showed some examples of wastewater treatment plants that are happening. This one, and the green one that I show here, is from Oxford. It's a treatment plant in Oxford, Maine. So they're They're a little bit more modern design that kind of fit into the landscape of a smaller town. The red model is kind of the goal that they're looking for to do in Wyndham. But basically, what's within that structure is what's called an advanced membrane bioreactor technology, or MBR, which you'll see that equipment there in the photo to the right. And you see the water, the condition of the water that happens, that goes through that wastewater treatment plant and comes out as almost potable water. And so what happens is all that goes through a system underground, comes from that building and goes through a system underground that's pictured here, and then would go into the land. So you would need like either a field. In Wyndham, they've surrounded this area with sports fields, so that way they're getting irrigation for the sports fields, and you have an appropriate lay down area for the affluent that comes from the treatment plant. And so it's not really common that there would be treatment plant conversations to dispose of your affluent in a stream of some sort or in a water body of some sort. That's kind of a no-no for DEP, and they're working on limiting affluent discharge into current bodies of water and things of that nature. So it'd be best for us to explore this technology and this method. So just a few points on this. We can continue to learn from Wyndham. Wyndham partnered with the Portland Water District to do this, so we could consider a partnership with the Portland Water District to potentially use the Wyndham model, a lot of that work that's been done. In Wyndham, their treatment plant and collection system, which essentially, if you can envision the North Wyndham shopping area from like Lowe's and Home Depot all the way down to the intersection of 115, that's their collection area, which I think is much larger than the collection area that we'd be looking at initially. And that that cost is about $44 million. As part of that cost, or as part of that project, they are also developing a ring road system around the shopping centers in partnership with Maine DOT to help alleviate congestion and pinch points on Route 302. And then they're also developing the fields, which each one of those projects all have a separate budget. So I'm hoping that we would be able to use some of the development from their model to basically develop a cost estimate based on whatever, similar to the underground utilities, whatever linear feet we would need and where our disposal site would be and things of that nature. I think Doug and Will have worked on identifying some potential disposal sites that we can consider as we further go down the road. But so similar to the underground utilities, we'd want to offer support to properties. The other thing we'd want to consider potentially, this would become an enterprise fund of the municipality. So only sewer users would pay for the cost of this. Ultimately, it wouldn't be the general taxpayer. So we do our best to fund it with non-property tax dollars to start, such as TIFs, grants, things of that nature, and then the users would then essentially pay for the system. So that would involve maybe debt service if we've got infrastructure, and having heard from a property owner who's working on developing a large septic system, they range between $250,000 to $500,000. So to be able to connect to a system, they'd be willing to pay whatever the additional charge is while the system is in its infancy. But we'd want to, as part of that, consider potentially in the core area a mandate, so we could begin to forecast what the revenue streams would be for properties. Along with that mandate would come support as a way to encourage folks to connect their properties to the sewer, and that support could potentially go with a deadline. So as property owners decide not to participate, they can't access those funds, and so we would work to develop that budget. Much like with the other, we would pursue grant funding. Wyndham is actually primarily funding most of theirs through tax increment financing, along with a congressionally directed spending grant that they received from one of our representatives. And so with the, the blessing from the council, I would try to learn a lot more from Wyndham. I've spoken with one of the town councilors already who I had a relationship with, who did a lot of work on this. But the benefits of having the wastewater, at least in the core of the village, it would support higher density. It would support the efforts of our resiliency committee to improve groundwater contamination. And it would allow the system, we would develop the system to allow for future expansion. So if there was new neighborhoods or new developments that wanted to be able to connect into this system, essentially we'd be looking for revenue, so we would want to support that. And as developers want to develop in this area, they would bear the cost to lay that new pipe and put into that connection, and if they needed pump stations or things of that nature. And then again, we could explore a phased approach where we do the core of Main Street and try to keep it within the area that's being touched by the Village Transformation DOT project. And then we could explore the other areas in the future after the main DOT project. So this was an item that we worked with DOT. Again, they wanted us to confirm that this was something that we wanted to pursue. And I think it would be a tremendous benefit to the long-term viability of the village.
Ann?
Yeah, I just want to acknowledge that for some of you, some listeners, or to anybody who watches this might be a really scary topic. I mean, we haven't had a kind of a community conversation about wastewater treatment and creating that kind of facility in Gray. But I do think, and it's nothing that will happen, tomorrow or next year. Even the year after. Yeah, it's going to take us a while, and there will be opportunities to have more conversation about this. But I think Mike is really right that if we're talking about growing the village as the business core of the town, which is what the comprehensive plan imagined, we're going to have to come up with some other ways to deal with wastewater. And this is one solution. Or probably the only solution, honestly, is to have some sort of wastewater treatment. I will say I did a tour of the Portland wastewater treatment plant it was kind of called a poo and brew. They went and had beers afterward. But anyway, it was a really illuminating tour, and I think it might be useful to do some field trips, honestly. Maybe up to Oxford if Wyndham's isn't built yet. I also learned on that tour that Wyndham's facility, and it might be useful to you to probe into this, Mike, is that their facility was already almost oversubscribed. Like they've had more inquiries into it than they initially imagined they would have, and more interest, which is, I think illustrates how commercial property owners and business owners are interested in this kind of infrastructure, but also just means that we need to be thoughtful about the, designing the capacity.
Yeah, I'm definitely also on board with pursuing this. I think if we're going to be realistic about growing the village and having it look and feel the way we want it to going forward, we really need this type of infrastructure to support that growth. I would also suggest for a more right-sized example for Gray for this type of work, we might want to speak with the select board or representatives from Bridgeton. They're, I think, just completing a sewer system in their village.
I wasn't aware.
And they had some US DOT or so they had a federal grant program that was supporting that. I don't know if they're online yet, but I know that they're building a wastewater treatment facility just outside of their village off of 302. And perhaps it might ultimately look like some of the examples that you were showing us. Matthew?
Yes, I guess I want to preface what I'm going to say as I'm not in any way representing my employer.
Okay.
Here. I'm representing myself alone on my own time.
Yeah.
But I do have wastewater in my veins, so to speak. And
Paints a picture.
and I totally agree with this idea that wastewater infrastructure is going to be critical for commercial development. I would want it to be, targeted to support concentrated commercial development as opposed to, sprawling residential development. And I think Bonnie Eagle Schools is another opportunity to explore something smaller than Wyndham. They have a wastewater disposal system also. And I believe, and I'm not sure what Bridgeton has for a treatment plant, but I don't think they have as advanced a treatment plant as
I'm not,
Oxford does.
yeah, I'm not sure what type they utilize, but I know that it's being
But-
built, yeah.
Yeah, and, again, if our, where we're gonna dispose of the wastewater is, limiting, then, the solution to that is to get more and more advanced treatment. But you wanna strike a balance, I think, between, if you've got a good place to get rid of it, and it doesn't have to be so highly treated, that's something to explore also. And also, I guess I would just like to say that, in my mind, the disposal limitation here is the distance to any sort of river or receiving water that's of enough size to accept wastewater. I'm not aware that there's any policy that new discharges are not allowed by DEP, and I understand that Oxford is an example where they're a new discharger to the Little Androscoggin River. So, but just looking at Gray, I can't see to get to a sizable, to have underground pipe to a sizable enough receiving water would be the limiting factor. I think the cost of that sort of drives us towards in-ground. And I think, I agree, Bridgeton would be another excellent example to explore, because, they re-sewered the whole downtown, and it's very much a part of a revitalization
Right.
project. So that's an excellent example.
Dan?
Yeah, we've actually had the conversation informally for a while now.
Right.
Right.
And I think that, and that's a good thing. I mean, it's
Yeah.
the momentum piece. I want to second what Ann said about people starting to get comfortable with the idea that there's a much longer lead time to these things. And any of these kinds of undertakings are gonna be measured in years. And so the planning has to start now, if years from now you wanna be able to do it. I would be interested in, I think that we have, I would be interested in it getting us going, for sure. I would also be interested in understanding the operating costs, or the projected operating costs for these systems, because that would help understand like how many people or how many customers, I guess, we would have to find to make it a sort of self-sustaining thing that wouldn't have to be supported by property taxes. But I'd also be interested, we have some residential areas now, we've got up to Wayne, and we've got Gray Park, and so there is some residences here already, and I wouldn't want to necessarily exclude them unless we had to do it initially because of cost. And I know we're disturbing sort of from Collie Hill Road down as far as this project, and MDOT plans to do the northern part of that much sooner than this, but it's not that far from Wayne Avenue to Collie Hill Road, so probably by the time we're in a position to do this, we wouldn't run into any trouble, any objections to MDOT to opening up that section of road again. So, yeah, so I'm all in for finding out more.
Yeah, and I guess I would just, I have no problem with using it for concentrated residential development, or, multi-unit residential development, as opposed to, so when I said commercial, I didn't mean to exclude residential either, just to promote, concentrated development in the core.
I know we'll never have wastewater on Johnson Road.
No.
Yeah,
It's
or
a little
ever
ways
near
out.
Ford Road.
And also, I think, the examples that Mike was trying to show are valid examples, whereas, the Portland Water District East End plant that's the biggest treatment plant in the state, and, the issues associated with a plant like that, or a plant like, Falmouth's, 1 million gallon per day plant, or Westbrook is multi-million dollar gallons per day. Yeah, totally different scale, totally different issues. You don't have, you know, the most odorous type operations that at a bigger treatment plant you would have at a treatment plant this size. I think, you know, like in terms of the most intensive, expensive to operate plant would be something like Oxford's. And that's not necessarily what we need. We need to know what the disposal limitations are gonna be to know, you know, how intensive the treatment plant has to be and the operational costs there.
I thank Mike for displaying that, because I think that the technology has changed so much so quickly over even just the last 3 years that we've kind of been, you know, talking about it out loud. That it really affords us an opportunity that, you know, frankly, if we'd had to go with a system like they have in the East End or anything like that, we'd never be able to afford to do that kind of infrastructure. So this stuff is actually, you know, putting it in reach for us.
Yeah, we shouldn't even, in my view, we shouldn't be thinking in those terms at all. You know, like a treatment plant. I mean, we're really probably thinking more of an in-ground type system with, you know, with a above-ground structure for controls and stuff like that. But,
Yeah.
not big tanks, you know, big aerated tanks, you know, like on the surface or anything like that.
Yeah, no,
It's not your grandparents' sewage treatment.
Well, I mean, you know, if we were planning on having, you know, development the size of Portland, we would still have to build a Portland-sized treatment plant.
no, I don't think we're aiming for that size.
No.
So it sounds like we're all in favor of moving forward with,
Yep.
exploring that. Before I move on to, just reviewing the work plan proposal from Principal Group, Mike, did you have anything else you
Yes, I
wanted?
had one other item that we wanted to get some council guidance on
Okay.
as part of this. So it's the Gateway Property baseball fields that have been kind of part of the Village Transformation Project. And so here you can see the schematic that was kind of put together where this property would become a mixed-use property with potentially some residential opportunities, some commercial opportunities, and then parking and 2 baseball fields with maybe a multi-use field in the middle, playground, things of that nature. This is a sketch plan that I think the Principal Group drew this up. Yes, it was given to me. So that plan has been kind of in place, and I know the Little League has been eager to apply for a grant opportunity to help them execute this, at least the fields aspect of it. And they've considered potentially doing the fields aspect before the Village Transformation Project actually is undertaken. And so they're eager to potentially get some new fields in place, given some of the complications associated with the Douglas Field. And so they're very interested in this proposal, and I think this is one of the proposals that was maybe considered as part of some of the budget discussions last year that I wasn't part of, but at least I know relocation of Douglas Field was a priority for the budget. So some of the points to talk about associated with this is, one, it's ultimately designed to replace the Douglas Field property. The proposal is mixed use, as I said. The Little League wants to pursue some grant opportunities. And so I've learned a little bit more about that from the Little League. The grant opportunities, typically, they don't anticipate receiving a grant much larger than $500,000. And in any case, the grantee, which is Major League Baseball, in partnership with Little League International, wants to see a project that has essentially pretty concrete estimates and half of the project funded. So even with some of the funds that was set aside as part of the budget, not knowing what complete cost would be, we'd still, I think, be a ways away from half funding. So we'd have to consider funding opportunities. One of the things that the council identified as part of the funding for this field was TIF funding. And so I just wanted to share with everyone that we've concurred with legal, and as it turns out, TIF funding isn't eligible for recreational field usage. It can be eligible to support some of the infrastructure, such as the parking, some of the other things that we would be doing as part of that broader project if we did what I showed on the vision there. So we could potentially use that, but we wouldn't be able to use any of that funding to go towards the construction of the fields. So the only real funding that we have available right now that the council had set aside in years past was, I think, approximately $50,000 from the, what's it called?
The sub-D.
Sub-D account.
Yeah.
And so that could potentially be used for some engineering aspects. But what I've also learned from the Little League is they don't need necessarily a concrete engineering design as much as a schematic and appropriate estimates to be able to apply for the grant. So we might not need to invest as much money for grant application. So the thing that why we wanted to kind of bring this to the council is, I think there's some people, both, folks from the principal group and some of you that may believe that baseball fields on this Gateway property is not the highest and best use of the property, given the goals to expand the village and to have some development. But it does have some mixed-use opportunity where not only would the fields just be used during baseball season, but there's potentially a multi-purpose field overlaid. So there is opportunity for other things, and it's not a bad thing to have, open space in the village area. But there is someone who's reached out to work with the Little League on a potential alternate site in the town. And so what I just wanted to bring forth is to continue to get the council's support, to continue to explore the Gateway property and potentially this other property that a member of the community has reached out to work with the Little League on, and then come back to you at a later date with a plan for that, because we will need a new funding plan potentially for that, and work with potentially this other future property owner and see what would be necessary in order to secure that land in the other part of the community, and or what we would do with the rest of the Gateway property or the Douglas Field property after that. So it's a fairly complex discussion that I just wanted to be transparent about with everyone about the discoveries regarding the funding, as well as, because this is important to the Little League and important to the community, that we just wanted to let folks know and get the council's blessing to continue to explore potentially this property as well as a potential other location that may be available.
So what, you need a decision from us this evening about whether we'd just like to continue to pursue this field on the Gateway property, or this other site?
Not necessarily a decision on that, but just to give me the kind of go-ahead to try to work this out with all the parties, to try to find an opportunity that may be best for the town and the Little League long-term.
Okay,
So it still might be this site,
right.
it might be the other site, and so I'll, if the council's okay with me continuing to work through that with the all involved parties, then I'll try to bring forward a more complete plan in the future.
Okay. Yeah, it's unfortunate that we've since learned that TIF funding is ineligible for this use, because that was not the direction we had during budget season last go-around, so that's unfortunate. I mean, I certainly would like to honor the commitment we've made to the community to see the types of recreational fields they want in the village. I do have concerns about just the long-term funding and what that would look like, especially since we don't have TIF funds available for this. And I think we would need to pursue grant opportunities, otherwise it would have a fairly significant tax impact for the entire community. So, Dan?
Yeah, I think, I agree. In my mind, it's kind of, I was against putting the fields across the way, because I didn't think that's the best use. But I think that land can always be repurposed, so in the greater scheme of things, it was more important, I think, to move on. So I'm not at all against the idea that there might be a more suitable location for it. And I wouldn't fight against putting them across the street if that's where we end up. As far as the funding's concerned, I think it does make sense to get an estimate, to get an idea of what we're looking at. We don't need, engineered plans, so, frankly, I think you could probably get an estimate off of, a reasonable estimate off of, the principal group's, slide. I think that, there were some issues around the purchase of the Hamilton property that I don't want us to repeat. So I'm hesitant to really talk anymore in public session about other pieces of property.
Yeah, I agree.
But yeah, I would ask Mike to pursue whatever, you know, if the Little League is, you know, they're sort of our partner, and if they're in on alternate locations, because that's gonna make it easier to happen, I'm not against any variations on the plan myself.
Okay. Ann?
Yeah, a couple quick questions for you, Mike. Is there a particular deadline for the MLB
Right.
funding?
Yeah, so it's a rolling application
Oh,
process, so the Little League is more concerned about having like a complete proposal, so that way we can provide the complete estimate. I just did want to point out, we did invite representatives of the Little League this evening and some other folks that we knew were interested in it to let them know we'd be talking about it, and we don't have anyone here, so I'm not sure if anyone's online to participate.
Right. And let's see, the other question I had was, I mean, I don't know what the Little League's timeframe is, and just wondering, is staying on, you know, continuing to use Douglas Field an option?
Right, that was gonna be my.
Yeah.
Yes, I've had discussions with the property owner that has conflicts with the use of Douglas Field, and they are willing to continue to allow the use until we come up with a resolution.
Well, that's good news. Yeah, I think I'm on board with continuing to explore, what options we have and, you know, helping them secure grant funding or at least, you know, apply for that grant. Yeah, go ahead.
If there is going to be more money needed from the town, we can do what we've done in the past is, you know, we can set aside a little bit, you know, if it was another $25,000 or $50,000 this year, I mean, you do that for, you know, 2 or 3 years, and it doesn't have as big
Right.
a hit on the taxes, but when we get to the point where we need the money, we have a pool of money that can be used, so that's something I think would be worth considering once we have an idea what the costs are gonna be.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I think also the Little League has mentioned that they have the ability to, you know, leverage a significant amount of in-kind commitments as
Right,
well.
they do certainly have quite the community of support.
Yeah.
Okay, and would you mind kind of just giving us a quick overview of the proposal from Principal Group? Or I
Sure.
can if you'd rather.
Sure. So, just by way of background, the Principal Group is our consultant to the Village Transformation Project. They're very much value added, I believe. We can't do this work without resourcing it properly, and we've taxed our town staff to the max, and Principal Group frankly brings skills that we don't, you know, some of which we don't really have on staff. So and a lot, you know, and different experience, which I think is helpful to us. So this is their proposal. If you recall that we had, Nate, before he left, had signed kind of like a master contract that was very broad and general in scope, but with the understanding that that we would mutually agree on kind of smaller work plans under that master contract, and that's what this proposal represents, is the next sort of tranche of work. It's designed to help us get to the point where we can apply for the RAISE grant, so that's one of the end goals. But also, and I think Russ may be joining us now, Russ Preston from the Principal Group. He had a family emergency, so he's a little bit delayed logging on. And the other piece of it, and if that is Russ joining them?
I don't see
You
it.
don't see him?
Can't
Okay.
Yeah.
Because I see something on the TV screens up there, that's something different?
Yeah.
Okay. The other piece of it is some, like, is community engagement and, you know, information sharing, communications, and reaching out to some stakeholders in the village to make sure that they're really, you know, understanding what it is we have in mind and the long-term benefits to them, and kind of trying to get their buy-in. You know, the Principal Group was invaluable in not just planning, but holding the recent meeting with business owners and business and commercial property owners in the village. They're also proposing Here, you'll see several events, open houses and workshops and things like that to help bring the public in. You know, they really excel at the visuals and not just using them to acquaint people with what we have thought about and you know, or decided or tentatively decided so far, but using those visuals to reflect back on the public or to the public what their ideas are. And so it's a very much of an interactive process, and I think that's just you know, invaluable. So what you see here is that work sort of through you know, kind of the end of September, which will lead up to the RAISE grant being released, the notice of funding opportunity being released toward the end of this year.
Right, and I think in addition to all that stakeholder work and the visualizations that you're talking about, they also were discussing creating some development scenarios and what that might look like for certain key sites in the village.
Yeah.
And then how that might relate to kind of a quick summary of cost benefit analysis. They wouldn't go into a deep dive for that, but it would give us a potential picture of the type of development we could see in, like I said, key sites in the village. And
Right, it's sort of essentially another way to put that is making the business case for
Exactly.
going through this agony.
right, yeah, it's a nicer way to say it. And then, so the budgeted amount for these services would be through, I think, October of this year, beginning in March. And they're estimating almost $75,000 for that work. But I believe, Ann, they said it was going to be billed against the budget we had for FY24. Is that, am I remembering that correctly? Or we wouldn't be budgeting for this amount in FY25. It would be against what we budgeted already.
That's my understanding.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we had a previous contract or work plan with them, and I don't think we've exhausted those funds.
Right.
We may be close to it at this point because they've done some work over the last several months. But we also, as part of the FY24 budget, had moved money out of TIF funds into the budget in order to pay for some costs, and these would be eligible, I would think. Yeah, I mean, I think that's what we had in mind to pay them.
Right, that was my understanding when we spoke with them. Yeah. Did you look? You looked like you wanted to talk, Dan. I don't
Well,
know.
I just, yeah, I mean, you're talking about my question, I guess, which
Okay.
was, we've thought that we've set aside some money in our budget, and I wanna, find
Make
out
sure
if
we
in
did,
fact, that we did. So
Yeah.
that was, the money part was a question. One just quick sort of public service announcement, I guess. The artwork that the principal group puts together for us that helps us get an idea of what this looks for is extremely attractive. It's really important for people to not think that magically that's what's gonna happen when this project is done. I mean, the buildings that are put on the corner of streets and all of that's fleshed in there is a daydream of what could be, and maybe it will be, who knows? But I just really wanna caution people about
Yeah.
understanding the purpose of those drawings, because it's just to help us get an idea, a better idea, a concrete idea of the potential in the future. And I don't want people to, maybe that don't have as much experience or much exposure to a big project like this, to look at those drawings and think that when we're done, that's exactly what we're gonna have.
Great
So
point.
I just think we have to beat that drum occasionally.
Yeah.
The stakeholder interviews, that piece of it, is that something that we need to do again, particularly as a requirement of the RAISE grant? The RISE grant?
I think that would certainly support the RAISE grant, but I think it's also true that the business community wasn't particularly involved in the intensive charrette that we had in July 22, and here's Russ, and he can help to explain what they had in mind. But I think it's really valuable, not for every business owner, but for the larger commercial property owners and business owners, to have more in-depth conversations about what is the potential for their sites. I don't know, Russ, you want to jump in on that?
Yeah, welcome, Russ. You're joining us right in time.
I think you're muted.
I think
Oh.
you're, yeah.
Oh, you're muted, Russ.
Oh, there, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yeah, we were just talking about the
everyone.
stakeholder interviews and whether, that would be beneficial for the raised grant, beyond what we've already done,
Or necessary.
or necessary.
guess.
Yeah, right.
I'm feeling like we've kind of already done it. That's where I'm sort of coming from.
Generally, I think there's probably a few properties that we didn't study in detail during the 2022 work that have come up recently in discussion that we would likely want to engage with. So I don't see this as a big lift. It's probably 4 or 5 properties at most. And generally, I think, there's sort of a half-life of any of these discussions. So some of the property owners things might have changed in the last couple of years that we'd want to kind of circle back with them. And just generally, if we're going to study anything in great detail and it's not a town-owned parcel, we like to engage with the owners just to, to make sure they're aware of what's going on. So I think whether that's us doing it or someone else on the project team, from the town doing it, I think it's just a good, kind of good step in the process. So
Makes sense.
Hopefully that helps.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Explain it a little bit more.
I think it does, thank you. Yeah, Mike?
Yeah.
Thank you. If I just might add, one, I haven't been involved in the management or oversight of this contract and this work, so working with Ann while she's project managing it and hoping that the council will support in the budget, maybe a position to help with some project management here for all these different projects that we're working on, to relieve her of that responsibility. We can better manage these contracts and ensure we're doing things that the council wants us to do. And then also, as part of the budget last year, the council set aside and was approved by the voters approximately $250,000 for both village engineering, planning, and design. So we have funds set aside that can be managed for this, and I'll make sure those are properly documented for the future. And then we'll be working to set aside additional funds in the future to continue to support this project in the years to come. And primarily through TIF funding.
Yeah, I was gonna say those were set aside as part of the village TIF, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm certainly supportive of this work plan. As Ann mentioned earlier, I think Principal Group has been an invaluable partner in both the visioning for this work and also just getting our partnership more aligned with DOT goals. And I think if they can see us through this RAISE grant in particular, I think that would definitely be valuable. Anyone else have thoughts on the work plan?
Good.
Dan?
Yeah, I have a couple more.
Okay.
One of them is the development scenarios. It says create one preferred and 2 alternate scenarios. And how are we going to determine what's preferred?
I think
Russ, do you
might
wanna,
be able to answer that.
you wanna take that? Did you hear Dan's question?
Yeah, no, I did. That is, that's a good question. I think this is, depending on each site, it might be slightly different. Depending on how it interacts with the streetscape, or what the development potential might be. And I think that's where, looking at, some of our work will be looking at projected value creation here, and some of it might be looking at, the contribution to the village center in other ways. And I think each of those criteria, what we generally do in other communities, have established a sort of set of values or a set of, whether they're measurable in tangible ways or not, we've set up sort of a way that we can look at it from 360 degrees and say, hey, is this a preferred outcome? I think we could probably look back at some of the planning we did in 2022 and sort of establish those very clear value sets. And at this level, say, hey, is a 4-story building here better or a 3-story building, or is a different mix of uses or a different build out of the site, and start to sort of align with those values and try to measure those in ways that say, well, this is likely the preferred outcome on this site, but here's 2 others that would be good as well. And sometimes at this early stage where we don't have a handful of property owners saying, hey, I'm ready to redevelop my property yet, It might be that there's just 3 scenarios that are likely outcomes that all try to achieve the best possible outcome. And that way, in future discussions, when a property owner might be ready to come forward and say, hey, I'm ready to do something with my land, you have sort of 3 outcomes. One might be more commercially oriented, one might be more residentially oriented, one might have different building types than other building types, but they all might try to achieve the same goals or outcomes. So I think that's why we always set up at this stage, not one saying, hey, this is how we see this being redeveloped, but a few options so that future discussions can be more informed. Does that make sense?
Can I add to that? Can I add to that? Just to add also, the development scenarios are gonna become more critical as we get willing property owners at the table, willing to work with us. Once we decide what to do with the Gateway property, because we control that and we can dictate how that's developed in the future. But development scenarios are also gonna be very critical to the forecasting of tax increment financing dollars and our ability to fund infrastructure improvements such as underground utilities, sewer, any other parts of the project. So we're gonna want to have potential estimates of this is what could be on this property, this is what could be on this property, and this is the potential assessed value of these, and this is what it's gonna generate for revenue on an annual basis to help fund some of those things. And that will be helpful in the future, and will be more helpful when we have willing property owners at the table, which I think some of them will start to come to the table knowing the work that the council is undertaking.
I think that we have plans that have been created in our past that are sitting and collecting dust and were never realized. I think this is bigger and has more likelihood of success than some of those did, because the problem is we kind of always in the past started in the middle, and we've done a lot more foundational stuff here, which I think is gonna make it easier to implement some of these things. I think there's nothing in your sort of scope that speaks to our comp plan. And I know our comp plan, and I know you folks are in tune with that. But I'd like to see it emphasized more, because within the comp plan, we have established some of these things. And I think when we created the comp plan, we wanted to create a plan, Krista knows this better than anybody, that wasn't set in concrete, that was just instructions that we would follow off into the future. But that was something more organic that would evolve as we understood better what we want to do. So the idea of checking in and doing these stakeholder interviews again is kind of a way to prove that we're sort of still on the right track. So I think that makes sense. I have to say I don't have any experience with the economic potential analysis and the development plans. I have to tell you that I get a bit of a if we build it, they will come kind of feeling from that, which makes me a little less confident, I guess, in the value of that, because it feels like that stuff would have a shelf life. So obviously I need to learn more about it. I'm not against it, but we don't have the building inventories that I was in Norway last week and walked up and down and drooled practically at the building stock that they have there that people could put to use. And we don't have that. So whatever someone's gonna have to build that. We've had some brief conversations about, what the interim steps to that might be. And I think we need to have more of those, because it doesn't feel realistic to me to expect that all of a sudden we're gonna see new construction popping up all along Main Street and on the corners. And I'm willing to, say that I could be all wrong about that, but I wanna be more confident about that, I guess, than I feel now.
Can I just hop in, because in previous discussions I've had with Russ about this, he's talked about choose your own adventure. I don't know if you think that's a relevant, response here, Russ, but it's partly, you know, to your earlier point is if we put one image on a paper, if that's the only image that people see, it's gonna be easier for them to think, well, that's the way it's gonna be. But if there are, you know, a variety of scenarios, visuals as well as these economic analyses, business and property owners can kind of choose their own adventure and think about what it is their plans are. You know, are they thinking about selling their property in the next 5 years, or are they wanting to really scale up and do something much bigger and stay in the game? I mean, that's the adventure that they get to choose, and the economic analyses are not, they're not super intensive, is my understanding, Russ, but they will help provide some support to those owners in figuring out what their adventure, what adventure they want to choose.
I want to give
Yeah,
Russ
yeah.
a chance to answer, but I just in recognition of the time, it's
yeah.
7:10, so
Yeah. Oh.
we're gonna just end after his thoughts and
Yeah.
just quick conclusions.
Yeah, thank
Go
you.
ahead, Russ.
I'll be quick, but I think the couple points we made in this discussion between the stakeholder interviews, the scenario plans, and here the economic potential are all interrelated. And I think this goes back to, that plans don't create great places, people create great places. So I think part of our effort here is to start to lay the groundwork for future properties to redevelop, and to start to bring around a conversation that opens up people's minds to thinking about what could be different with their individual property. And I think that's part of the economic potential that we look at is, if we're running a scenario and it just doesn't look like it's going to be feasible to only be developed as 2 stories, but the community says, well, we only want 2 stories here, we think that's appropriate. And I think it's part of our sort of practice to come back and say, but that might not actually be developed right now, or for some window into the future. If you want to see this redeveloped, it might actually need to be 2.5 or 3 stories. And those types of conversations are important to kind of tease out now with the economic potential for sites. And that kind of is an easy way, not a very, it's not a complex feasibility, fiscal impact study of the sort, but it does sort of allow us to start to visualize what some of these scenarios that we're looking at can do from a tax revenue standpoint. And then I think that sort of, we had this discussion a couple of weeks ago about well, why have previous plans not been effective at moving the ball? And I think we're very aware of that issue, and hoping that as we get into this further, we can start to address some of those hurdles around implementation, which I think, given all that's going on right now, I think the scene is very different than previous plans, is my understanding. So, I think for us, we've just sort of gotten to the point where this economic impact analysis, at the most high level with the potential, we try to do this on all of our projects so that we can actually tease out what's going to be feasible and actually lead to projects versus just the plan sitting on the shelf. So I think it's sort of core to kind of this next step of work.
Thanks, Russ. So just to gauge kind of a straw poll, are we all comfortable moving forward with the
Yes.
proposed work plan, or do you? Yep. Okay.
We'll get a chance to talk about it more.
Yeah, we can
I
certainly.
appreciate you timekeeping.
Right, yeah,
Yes.
we can certainly refine it as we go, but I think the general outline here, Russ, is something we're all comfortable with. But thank you for joining us to help us clarify those.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think the way we've set this up, it has feedback loops in it. So let's just continue the discussion as we go into it and adjust as needed. So that's great.
Okay.
All right, well, thanks for having me.
Okay, thanks.
Thanks for
Have a good
joining
night.
us.
Yes,
Right.
good night,
Yeah,
Russ.
you too. Bye.
Okay, so apologies to those watching. We are going to adjourn our workshop at 7:13 p.m. and we'll just take a 5-minute break before we come back together for our full meeting. So I will see everyone at 7:18 p.m.